What if the life you knew was a lie? What if the people you called friends would hate you if they knew the truth? At 17 years old, Chidi Kalu was born into a world of wealth, privilege, and power, heir to a billionaire empire. But for the first time in his life, he's walking into a world where money means nothing, and survival depends on trust. Disguising himself as an ordinary student in a struggling public school, he must navigate friendships, betrayal, and the terrifying weight of his own deception. But when a fearless girl with dreams bigger than her reality begins to break through his carefully built walls, and a ruthless school bully makes it his mission to expose him, Chidi realizes that hiding the truth comes with a cost. And when the truth finally comes out, will he still have anything left to fight for? Lies will unravel. Loyalties will be tested. And one boy will be forced to choose between the life he was given, and the one he wants to live. This is the story of the boy with two names. The secret that must never be revealed. The rain poured heavily that night, drumming against the mansion's glass windows. In the dimly lit study, Obinna sat across from his father, Chief Kalu, whose deep voice carried the weight of a man who had built an empire from nothing. "You will never understand the value of wealth until you see life without it," the billionaire said, his sharp gaze locking onto his only son. Obinna had heard the speech before, but tonight was different. His father wasn't just lecturing, he was making a decision that would change everything. "Tomorrow, you will start school as Chidi, not Obinna Kalu. No bodyguards, no luxury, no special treatment." Obinna's heart pounded. "You want me to, what? Enroll in a public school?" "Yes," his father confirmed, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside was an entirely new identity, Chidi Okafor, a boy from an average family, unknown to the world of billionaires. Obinna wanted to argue, but he saw the finality in his father's eyes. There was no way out. He had been born into wealth, but for the first time, he was being stripped of it. The thought terrified him, but what scared him more was the feeling that this decision, this secret, would spiral into something much bigger than he could ever imagine. And it did. Dressed in faded jeans and a plain t-shirt, Obinna, now Chidi, stepped onto the grounds of St. Peter's Public School. The scent of cheap food, dust, and the chatter of students filled the air. It was nothing like the elite private schools he had attended. There were no air-conditioned classrooms, no personal chauffeurs waiting at the gate. He felt the weight of his father's words pressing on him. "If you are to be a great leader, you must know what it feels like to have nothing." As he walked towards his classroom, a few students glanced at him, curious about the new boy. He ignored them and kept moving, until he nearly crashed into a girl. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, brushing dust off her uniform. She had sharp eyes, a confident stance, and an air of determination. "Sorry," Chidi muttered, stepping aside. The girl hesitated, then sighed. "You're new, aren't you?" "Yeah," he replied, forcing himself to stay in character. "I'm Chidi." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "I'm Ada. If you need help around here, don't get in my way." With that, she walked off. Chidi exhaled, realizing his hands were shaking. He wasn't sure if it was fear or excitement, but one thing was clear, his journey had begun, and there was no turning back. Chidi sat at the back of the classroom, his hands clenched into fists beneath the wooden desk. The walls were faded, covered in old posters and scribbles from past students. The teacher, a tired-looking woman in thick glasses, droned on about algebra, but Chidi barely heard her. His mind was still reeling from the morning's events. Ada, the girl with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, had already drawn attention to him. He hadn't expected to meet someone so bold, someone who could see through people so easily. Would she see through him? "Hey, new guy," a voice whispered beside him. Chidi turned to see a lanky boy with bright eyes and an easy grin. "I'm David." "You look lost." Chidi forced a smile. "Just getting used to things." David chuckled. "You'll get used to it fast. But watch out, this school isn't easy. If you're weak, people will take advantage of you." Chidi frowned. Like who? David gestured toward the front, where a group of boys sat, laughing and passing notes while ignoring the lesson. Hugo and his guys. They think they run this school. If you're lucky, they won't notice you. Chidi had dealt with bullies before, but they had always been in expensive schools, where conflicts were handled with meetings and expulsion threats. Here, things felt different. There were no bodyguards, no security cameras, no one to shield him if things went wrong. And he had a feeling they would. Lunch break came, and the schoolyard was alive with students eating, chatting, and playing soccer on the dry, uneven field. Chidi sat on a bench, unwrapping the meal his driver had packed for him, only to realize it was far too luxurious for this school. A neatly packed sandwich, fresh juice, and a fruit salad. He cursed under his breath. It was a mistake to bring this. He had to blend in. Too late. A large shadow fell over him. Chidi looked up to see Hugo, the boy David had warned him about. He was tall, muscular for his age, and had a cruel smirk on his lips. Behind him, his friends watched, waiting for the show to begin. "New boy," Hugo said, crossing his arms. "Nice lunch you got there." Chidi tensed. He could feel other students watching. He had two choices, fight back or give in. "Thanks," Chidi said coolly, closing the lunchbox. Hugo's smirk widened. "You must be rich." Chidi forced a laugh. "Why? Because I have a sandwich?" The other boys chuckled, but Hugo didn't. His eyes darkened. "You don't talk back to me, new boy. You must be stupid, or maybe you don't know how things work around here." A hush fell over the yard. Chidi could feel the pressure building. One wrong move, and he'd be in serious trouble. Then, a voice cut through the tension. "Leave him alone, Hugo." Ada. She stood nearby, her arms crossed, eyes locked onto Hugo's like a challenge. The bully scoffed. "And what? You gonna fight for him?" "Maybe I will," Ada shot back. For a moment, Hugo hesitated. Then, he grinned and took a step back. "Fine. But new boy," his eyes flicked to Chidi, "you won't be lucky forever." As the group walked away, Chidi exhaled. He looked up at Ada, who shook her head. "You really don't belong here," she muttered before walking off. And somehow, that felt worse than Hugo's threat. The day dragged on, and Chidi couldn't shake off Ada's words. "You really don't belong here." Did she suspect something? He needed to be careful. But at the same time, he couldn't deny he was curious about her. She was different from anyone he had met, bold, fearless, and clearly respected. After school, Chidi found David waiting for him at the gate. "Man, that was crazy," David said. "Ada standing up for you like that?" "Hugo doesn't back down for just anyone." "Who is she?" Chidi asked. David grinned. "Ada? She's the smartest girl in school, top of the class. But life's not easy for her. Her mom runs a food stall, and she's been working since she was a kid. She doesn't have time for nonsense." Chidi listened, intrigued. A girl like that, hardworking, independent, was the opposite of everything he had grown up around. David clapped him on the back. "Anyway, be careful. Hugo isn't the type to let things go. And if Ada keeps standing up for you, you might have bigger problems than you think." Chidi sighed. He had only been here for a day, and already, he had enemies. And perhaps, a friend. But the real problem? He was living a lie. And sooner or later, the truth would come out. Chidi sat alone in the classroom after school, staring at his notebook but seeing nothing. His mind was a storm. He had never struggled to make friends before. His name, his money, his connections had always opened doors. But here, none of those things mattered. Here, he was just Chidi Okafor, the new boy with no past. The door creaked open, and he looked up to see Ada standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're still here?" Chidi nodded. Just thinking. Ada leaned against the doorframe. You handled Hugo better than I thought you would. I didn't do anything, Chidi admitted. Exactly. Most new students would try to act tough or beg. You just stood there. That means either you're crazy or you're not as weak as you seem. Chidi smirked. Which one do you think I am? Ada studied him for a moment. I haven't decided yet. Then, without another word, she walked out. Chidi exhaled. She was right, he wasn't weak. But if he wasn't careful, he might just prove to her that he was a liar. The next day, Chidi arrived at school to find a folded note inside his locker. Meet me behind the school after lunch. Don't bring your little friend David. Hugo. His stomach twisted. He didn't need to be a genius to know this was trouble. But ignoring Hugo might be worse. During lunch, David noticed his silence. Something wrong? Chidi shook his head. Nothing. David frowned but didn't push. Ada, sitting a few seats away, glanced at Chidi briefly before returning to her meal. As the lunch bell rang, Chidi slipped away and made his way behind the school. The place was quiet, too quiet. Hugo was waiting, arms crossed. Two of his friends stood beside him, cracking their knuckles. You don't belong here, new boy, Hugo said coldly. You think you can just walk into this school and act like you're better than us? Chidi kept his expression neutral. I never said that. You don't have to, Hugo sneered. It's written all over you. One of the boys took a step forward, but before anything could happen, a voice rang out. Try it, and I'll make sure the principal hears about it. Ada. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed. Hugo cursed under his breath, glaring at her. You think you can protect him forever? Ada didn't flinch. Try me. Hugo let out a low laugh. Fine. But new boy, your luck will run out. As he and his gang left, Chidi turned to Ada. Why do you keep helping me? Ada hesitated. Because you remind me of someone I used to know. Before he could ask more, she was gone. Chidi sighed. He had survived another day. But for how long? Later that afternoon, Chidi found himself walking past the school library. He heard voices inside, Ada's and an older woman's. Ada, you need to focus. The university scholarship is your only way out, the woman said. I know, Auntie, Ada replied, frustration in her voice. But I can't just ignore what's happening around me. Chidi didn't want to eavesdrop, but he couldn't move. Stay out of trouble, Ada, the woman warned. You can't afford distractions. Chidi quietly walked away. For the first time, he realized that for Ada, this school wasn't just a phase. It was her only chance at a better life. And here he was, playing a role, pretending to struggle when he could walk away anytime. For the first time since coming here, guilt crept into his chest. The next morning, Chidi arrived at school to find Hugo waiting for him, alone. We need to talk, Hugo said, his tone different from before. Chidi crossed his arms. About what? Hugo smirked. You're smart. I don't like you, but I see potential. You want to survive here? Join my crew. Chidi blinked. What? You heard me. You have guts, and you're not afraid to talk back. That means you have value. Stick with me, and no one will mess with you again. Chidi hesitated. He knew better than to trust someone like Hugo. But rejecting him outright might make things worse. Think about it, Hugo said, before walking off. Chidi exhaled. If he accepted, he'd be safe, but at what cost? And if he refused, what would Hugo do next? The weight of Hugo's offer sat heavily on Chidi's shoulders. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being backed into a corner. That afternoon, he found himself walking with Ada. You've been acting weird, she noted. What's wrong? Chidi hesitated. Hugo wants me to join his crew. Ada stopped walking. Are you serious? Chidi nodded. Ada's face darkened. You do that, and you become part of his mess. You think people fear him because he's strong? No. They fear him because he makes them owe him. And when you owe Hugo, you don't get to walk away. Chidi swallowed. He had been right, this was a trap. So what do I do? He asked. Ada's expression softened, just a little. Stay out of his way. Don't give him a reason to come after you. And she hesitated. You're not as alone as you think. Chidi's breath caught. Those words, simple, yet powerful, struck something deep inside him. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he wasn't just playing a role. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to belong. Chidi sat in his small rented apartment, staring at his phone. His real life, his billionaire life, was just a call away. He could end this game at any moment, walk away from the dirt and the danger, and return to a world where people bowed at his father's name. But instead, he switched off his phone. He thought about Ada. About David. About the life he was beginning to understand. The struggles weren't just stories, people lived them. Ada fought for a future she might never have, while David joked about problems Chidi never had to face. And here he was, pretending to be one of them. For the first time, he wondered, if they knew the truth, would they hate him? The next morning, Chidi walked into school feeling tense. He had made a decision. He found Hugo by the basketball court, surrounded by his usual crowd. Chidi took a deep breath and walked up to him. I'm not interested. Hugo's laughter was short, sharp. Not interested in what? Your crew, Chidi said firmly. Silence. The boys around Hugo exchanged glances. No one refused him. Hugo's smile faded. Are you sure about that, new boy? Yeah, Chidi said. His heart pounded, but he held his ground. For a long moment, Hugo just stared. Then, without warning, he punched the basketball so hard it bounced off the pavement and rolled away. Fine, Hugo said, voice low. Let's see how long you last without protection. Chidi walked away, his back straight, but his gut twisted with unease. He had made an enemy. And he knew Hugo wasn't the type to forgive. 2 days later, it happened. Chidi was walking home alone when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, too late. Something slammed into his side, sending him crashing against a wall. Pain exploded in his ribs. Before he could react, 2 figures grabbed his arms, yanking him backward. A fist met his stomach. He gasped, choking on the pain. You should have joined when you had the chance, a voice sneered. Through blurred vision, Chidi saw one of Hugo's guys. His laughter was sharp and cruel. Another punch. Then another. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The boys ran off, leaving Chidi on the ground, gasping. For the first time since coming here, he felt fear. He wasn't a billionaire's son in this world. No one was coming to save him. Chidi dragged himself to school the next day, bruises hidden under his clothes. His ribs ached with every step. Ada noticed. Of course, she did. She grabbed his wrist, dragging him behind the school where no one could hear. What happened? Nothing, he muttered. Liar. Her eyes burned with anger. Was it Hugo? Chidi hesitated. He didn't want her involved. He had already put himself in danger, if Hugo saw her as a threat too. Drop it, Ada, he said. But she didn't. That afternoon, Chidi heard yelling near the classrooms. When he rushed to see what was happening, he found Ada standing toe-to-toe with Hugo. You think you're untouchable? She spat. Beating people up in the streets like a coward? Hugo smirked. I don't know what you're talking about. Ada stepped closer. Touch him again, and I swear, you'll regret it. Chidi's breath caught. She was fearless. Reckless. But this was Hugo. And now, she had made herself his next target. He needed to fix this, before someone got hurt. Chidi found Ada sitting on the steps after school, staring at the sky. "You didn't have to do that," he said, sitting beside her. She sighed. "Yeah, I did." Chidi hesitated. "Why?" Ada looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Because I don't like seeing people like Hugo win." There was something in her voice, something deeper than just anger. "Besides," she added, her tone lighter, "I don't think you're as weak as you pretend to be." Chidi chuckled, though it hurt his ribs. "I don't pretend." Ada arched an eyebrow. "Don't you?" For a moment, silence stretched between them. And then, without thinking, Chidi spoke. "What if I told you I'm not who you think I am?" Ada turned to him, eyes narrowing. "What does that mean?" His heart pounded. The truth was sitting on the edge of his tongue. One word, and everything would come crashing down. But he couldn't. Not yet. So he just shook his head. "Forget it." Ada studied him for a long time, then looked away. "You're strange, Chidi." "Yeah," he muttered. "I know." But the real question was, how long could he keep this secret before it destroyed everything? The next day, Chidi couldn't shake the feeling that Ada was watching him differently. Her sharp gaze followed him, as if she were trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't know existed. David noticed too. "You and Ada seem intense lately." Chidi forced a laugh. "She's just protective." David grinned. "She doesn't do that for just anyone." Chidi's stomach twisted. He wished he could believe Ada was just being a good friend. But deep down, he knew the truth, she was starting to suspect him. And the worst part? He didn't know if he wanted to stop her. That afternoon, Chidi made a mistake. His ribs still ached from the attack, so after school, he stepped into a small pharmacy near the market to buy painkillers. He pulled out his wallet without thinking. The cashier's eyes widened at the crisp, high-denomination bills. "You carry money like this?" Chidi stiffened. Too late. He mumbled an excuse, grabbed his change, and hurried out, only to run straight into Ada. She glanced at the pharmacy, then at his wallet. "Since when do poor boys carry that kind of money?" His pulse spiked. "It's from savings." Ada didn't say anything. But her silence was louder than words. She didn't believe him. And worse, he could see it in her eyes. She was going to find out the truth. That night, Chidi's bad luck got worse. A message arrived on his phone from an unknown number. "You're a fraud, and I know it. See you tomorrow. Hugo." Chidi's breath caught. His worst fear, exposure. But how? How did Hugo know? His mind raced. The only person acting suspicious lately was Ada. Had she told him? No. She wouldn't. Would she? Chidi barely slept, knowing tomorrow could bring the end of everything. School was different. Hugo's smirk was wider, his confidence stronger. He sat in class like a king, tapping his fingers against the desk as if counting down to something. David sensed the shift. "Hugo's up to something." Chidi nodded. "I know." During break, Chidi walked past the hallway when he heard whispers. His name. His identity. Rich boy. Fake student. His stomach turned to ice. By lunchtime, the entire school was buzzing. Someone had spread a rumor. And when he turned a corner, he found Ada and Hugo locked in an argument. "You're lying," Ada snapped. Hugo grinned. "Am I? Or is your little friend hiding something from you?" Ada turned to Chidi. Her eyes burned with a question. "Is it true?" His heart pounded. This was it. The moment he had been dreading. Chidi, Ada's voice was sharp. Tell me it's a lie. Chidi swallowed hard. What did he tell you? Hugo smirked. That you're not who you say you are. That you have more money than you pretend. That you're a spoiled little prince playing poor. Gasps rippled through the students watching. Ada's face twisted with something close to betrayal. Is it true? She whispered. Chidi clenched his fists. He had two choices. 1. Lie. Save himself. 2. Tell the truth. Lose everything. He took a deep breath and made his choice. Yes. Silence. Then, Ada stepped back like she had been punched. You lied to me, she said, voice shaking. Chidi reached for her. Ada, I don't. Her voice was cold. You're just like them. And with that, she turned and walked away. Chidi stood there, surrounded by whispers, his secret shattered. And for the first time since coming here, he had lost everything. Chidi sat alone in the classroom long after the final bell rang. The weight of Ada's last words crushed him. You're just like them. He had feared exposure. But he never expected it to feel this bad. His friendships weren't just built on deception. They were built on trust, trust he had shattered. David had barely spoken to him. The other students whispered behind his back. Even the teachers looked at him differently, as if they, too, had been fooled. But the worst part? Ada hadn't even looked at him all day. And somehow, that hurt more than Hugo's threats ever had. That night, Chidi sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. He considered calling his father. Ending this game. Going home. But he couldn't. Not yet. A sudden knock on his door made him jump. His heart pounded as he opened it, and found David standing there. David's face was unreadable. We need to talk. Chidi stepped aside, letting him in. For a long moment, David said nothing. Then, why? Chidi exhaled. I wanted to understand life outside wealth. To see what it was like to be normal. David scoffed. Normal? You think this is a game? People here don't get to pretend to struggle, Chidi. We live it. Chidi's chest tightened. I never meant to hurt anyone. David studied him, his expression unreadable. Then, he pulled out his phone. Chidi's stomach dropped. On the screen was a screenshot of a message. From Hugo. Thanks for the info, David. You were right, he's been lying this whole time. The room spun. You told Hugo? David's jaw tightened. I didn't know he'd spread it like that. He ran a hand over his face. I was angry, man. You lied to me. To Ada. To all of us. Chidi couldn't breathe. David had been his first friend here. And now, he had been the one to ruin him. Chidi's fists clenched. You sold me out. David flinched. I messed up. Chidi's voice was quiet but deadly. Get out. David hesitated, his face a mix of guilt and regret. But in the end, he said nothing. He just turned and walked out the door. And Chidi? He had never felt so alone. The next day, Chidi searched for Ada. He needed to fix this. Somehow. When he finally found her sitting by the school courtyard, her expression was cold, guarded. Ada, he said, his voice rough. Please, just listen. She didn't even look at him. I have nothing to say to you. I didn't mean to lie. But you did, she cut him off, standing up. Do you even understand what you've done? You walked into my life, into our lives, pretending to be one of us. Like we were some experiment. Chidi's throat tightened. I never saw you that way. Then what? Her voice rose. What was I to you, Chidi? A charity case? His heart clenched. No. You were. He swallowed. You are my friend. She shook her head, laughing bitterly. Friends don't lie like that. Friends don't betray. She turned to leave, but Chidi grabbed her wrist. Ada, please. For the first time, she looked at him, really looked at him. And what he saw in her eyes was worse than anger. It was disappointment. She pulled her hand away. Go back to your world, rich boy. And just like that, she was gone. Chidi walked through school like a ghost. David avoided him. The other students whispered. Hugo, on the other hand, walked with victory in his steps. How does it feel, rich boy? He sneered during lunch. To have everything, then lose it all? Chidi said nothing. He didn't have the strength to fight back. Hugo leaned closer. You know, I should thank you. You made this too easy. And now? He grinned. Now, I own this school again. Chidi clenched his fists. But what could he do? He had lost. No friends. No allies. No way out. And for the first time, he regretted ever coming here. Chidi never imagined he could feel so empty. The whispers at school never stopped. David barely looked at him. Ada wouldn't even acknowledge his existence. Hugo, on the other hand, was thriving. He ruled the school with renewed arrogance, as if Chidi's downfall had fed his power. Chidi wanted to fight back. Wanted to prove he wasn't just some rich kid playing pretend. But how could he? He had spent so much time pretending to be one of them, yet when it all came crashing down, he realized the truth. He never belonged here. And maybe, he never would. That night, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his father. I hope by now you understand the world outside wealth. Your time there is almost up. Return home soon. Chidi stared at the message, his chest tightening. Home. The thought should have brought relief. He could leave all of this behind. Forget the bruises, the hunger, the betrayal. But all he could think about was Ada. And how she had looked at him like he was a stranger. Could he really walk away like this? Or was there still something worth fighting for? The next day, Chidi walked into school with a new resolve. If he was going to leave, he wasn't going to leave like this. He wouldn't let Hugo rewrite his story. He had one last chance to fix things. At lunch, he walked straight up to Hugo's table. The entire cafeteria went silent. Let's settle this, Chidi said, his voice steady. Hugo smirked. Settle what? Chidi stepped closer. You think you've won. You think I'm nothing because I lost my friends. But the truth? You've always been afraid of me. Hugo's smirk wavered. You rule through fear, Chidi continued. But you know what's stronger than fear? Respect. And that's something you'll never have. The crowd murmured. Hugo's face darkened. You want a fight, rich boy, he growled. Chidi took a deep breath. No. I want a challenge. Hugo narrowed his eyes. What kind of challenge? Chidi smiled. A debate. In front of the whole school. You and me. Laughter rippled through the cafeteria. Hugo scoffed. You think words can save you? Chidi shrugged. What's wrong? Scared to lose when you don't have your fists? Hugo's jaw clenched. Finally, he sneered. Fine. You're on. And just like that, the battle had begun. The news spread fast. By the time Chidi got to class, Ada was waiting for him. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him with that unreadable expression. Then, finally, why are you doing this? Chidi swallowed. Because I need to prove that I'm not just some spoiled rich kid playing a game. Ada crossed her arms. And what do you expect to happen? That you'll win, and suddenly, everyone will forgive you? No, Chidi admitted. But at least I'll leave knowing I didn't run away. Something flickered in Ada's eyes. For the first time since everything fell apart, her expression softened. She shook her head with a small, reluctant smile. You're insane. Chidi grinned. I know. And just like that, he had a chance. The entire school gathered in the assembly hall. On one side, Chidi. On the other, Hugo. The debate topic was simple: what makes a leader? Hugo went first, pacing confidently. A leader is someone who makes others follow. Someone who controls. That's how the world works. The strong rule, and the weak obey. Cheers erupted from his followers. Then it was Chidi's turn. He stepped forward, took a deep breath, and spoke from his heart. A leader isn't someone who forces others to follow, he said. A real leader inspires. A real leader doesn't rule through fear, but through respect. The crowd fell silent. A real leader lifts people up, Chidi continued, his voice stronger. And the greatest leaders? They don't take power. They earn it. The hall erupted. For the first time, people weren't laughing at Chidi. They weren't whispering behind his back. They were listening. And Hugo? For the first time, he looked shaken. Chidi didn't win the debate in an official sense. There were no trophies, no judges. But when the crowd left the hall, they left talking about him. Hugo's hold on the school had weakened. And Chidi? For the first time, he felt at peace. After the debate, he found Ada waiting by the steps. You proved your point, she said. But that doesn't change what happened. Chidi nodded. I know. But I don't expect forgiveness, Ada. I just wanted to leave knowing I tried. Ada was silent for a long moment. Then, softly, so you're leaving? Chidi exhaled. Yeah. My time here is almost up. Ada looked away. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet. You know, you weren't just pretending to be one of us, Chidi. His heart clenched. What do you mean? She met his eyes. You became one of us. And in that moment, he knew. He had come here looking for a lesson. But what he found was something far greater. The days passed too quickly. Chidi had made his decision. It was time to go back to his world. But walking away felt wrong. He had spent his entire life surrounded by luxury, but here was where he had felt something real. The friendships, the struggles, even the pain, it all meant something. And then there was Ada. She still spoke to him, but there was a distance between them now. A wall neither of them knew how to break. On his last day at school, he found her sitting on the classroom steps. You're really leaving, she said, not looking at him. Chidi swallowed. Yeah. Silence stretched between them. I wanted to tell you sooner, he admitted. Ada finally turned to him. Then why didn't you? He exhaled. Because I don't want to go. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then, with a small, sad smile, she said, then don't. Chidi's heart clenched. You know I can't. Ada nodded. She had always known this moment would come. But that didn't make it hurt any less. The school day felt like a blur. People whispered as Chidi walked through the halls, but this time, the whispers were different. Some people still hated him. Some had started to respect him. But no one could ignore him anymore. David approached him at the end of the day. You're really leaving? He asked. Chidi nodded. Yeah. David sighed. Look, man. I messed up. I shouldn't have told Hugo. Chidi studied him for a long moment. Then, he held out his hand. David hesitated. Then shook it. Take care, Chidi, he said. Chidi nodded. You too, David. And just like that, their friendship wasn't fixed. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't completely broken either. That night, Chidi packed his things. His father had sent a car. By morning, he would be gone. A knock at the door made his heart jump. He opened it. Ada stood there. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, she stepped inside. "You didn't think you could leave without saying goodbye, did you?" she asked. Chidi smiled. "I was hoping to avoid it." Ada scoffed. "Coward." Silence stretched between them. The air felt heavy. Finally, Ada spoke. "So what happens now? You go back to your world, and we pretend this never happened?" Chidi's chest tightened. "No. I'll never forget this." Ada looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "Then don't." She turned to leave. And in that moment, Chidi made a choice. "Ada," he called after her. She paused. Then, before he could stop himself, he pulled her into a tight hug. For a second, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she hugged him back. It was both a goodbye and a promise. A promise that this wasn't the end. Chidi sat in the back seat of his father's luxury car, watching the city pass by. The streets he once found boring now felt unfamiliar. The mansion he used to call home? It felt cold. His father greeted him with a nod. "I trust you've learned your lesson?" Chidi clenched his fists. "Yeah. I did." His father studied him for a moment. "Good. Then you're ready to return to your place in the family business." Chidi exhaled. He should have felt relieved. But all he felt was lost. Because now, he wasn't sure where he truly belonged. Days passed. Then weeks. Chidi tried to slip back into his old life. The expensive clothes. The elite parties. The people who only cared about his last name. But it all felt empty. One night, he sat on his balcony, staring at the city lights. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "If you ever want to do something real, meet me at the university gates tomorrow at noon." Chidi frowned. Then, another message. From Ada. "Come if you're serious." His heart pounded. And just like that, he had a choice. Chidi stared at the message for what felt like forever. He had spent weeks trying to fit back into his old life, convincing himself that leaving was the right choice. But here was Ada, pulling him back into the world he thought he had lost. He didn't even hesitate. The next afternoon, he stood outside the university gates. Ada was there, leaning against the fence, arms crossed. "You actually showed up," she said, eyebrow raised. Chidi smirked. "You sound surprised." Ada shrugged. "Rich boys don't usually follow through." Chidi stepped closer. "Maybe I'm not just a rich boy anymore." Ada studied him. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. "Then prove it." Ada led Chidi through the university campus, her steps confident. "This," she said, gesturing around, "is what I've been working for. A real future. Not just surviving, but actually living." Chidi took it all in. The students. The energy. The hunger for something greater. Ada stopped in front of a small group of students gathered around a table filled with pamphlets. "They're raising funds for scholarship students," she explained. "Not everyone gets a second chance like I did. Some people need a little help." Chidi looked at the pamphlets. He knew money. He knew power. But for the first time, he realized he could use it for something more. "How can I help?" he asked. Ada blinked, caught off guard. "You want to help?" Chidi smiled. "Yeah. I do." Not everyone was happy to see Chidi back. As he and Ada walked through campus, a familiar voice stopped them. "Look who decided to crawl back," Hugo sneered. Chidi turned to find his old enemy leaning against a lamppost, arms crossed. You should have stayed in your rich world, Hugo continued. You don't belong here. Ada stepped forward. And you do? Hugo smirked. More than him. Chidi didn't flinch. Maybe I don't belong anywhere, he said. But that's not stopping me from trying. Hugo's eyes narrowed. You're still the same spoiled kid, thinking you can fix things with money. Chidi smiled. Maybe I am. But at least I'm doing something. What about you? Hugo's smirk faltered. For once, he had no comeback. And Chidi realized something. Hugo wasn't as strong as he pretended to be. He was just another kid trying to survive. Just like the rest of them. The more Chidi helped, the more he saw. People weren't just struggling, they were fighting. Fighting for education, for a future, for a chance. And Chidi had spent his whole life taking that chance for granted. One night, he made a decision. He walked into his father's office and placed a thick envelope on the desk. His father raised an eyebrow. What's this? My trust fund, Chidi said. I'm donating half of it to the scholarship program. Silence. Then, his father laughed. You're joking. I'm not. Chidi's voice was firm. You sent me out there to learn something. And I did. His father's expression darkened. And what did you learn? Chidi met his gaze. That money means nothing if you don't use it for something that matters. His father leaned back, watching him closely. For the first time, Chidi wasn't afraid. Chidi stood on the rooftop of the university building, watching the city lights flicker below. Ada joined him, hands tucked into her pockets. So, she said, you really did it. Chidi smiled. Yeah. I did. Ada smirked. You're still a rich boy, though. Maybe, Chidi admitted. But I'm more than that now. Ada studied him. Yeah, she said softly. You are. They stood there in silence, two people from different worlds, yet somehow, exactly where they belonged. Chidi had come into this life with two names. But now, for the first time, he finally knew who he was. Not Obina. Not Chidi. Just himself. And that was enough.